Shock and confusion quickly escalated to outrage and disbelief when less than 24 hours after Tiffany Valiante's tragic passing, her death was ruled a suicide. The 18-year-old had left her home one night following a dispute, but vanished within just 5 minutes, only to be discovered 3 miles away on the railway tracks. Described as happy and an outgoing young woman with a bright future, her family refused to accept this ruling, convinced something far more sinister must have happened that night. Join us as we unravel the twists and turns in this perplexing, unthinkable case. Tiffany Valiante lived in Mays Landing, New Jersey, with her parents Stephen and Diane Valiante, and she also had 2 sisters, Jessica and Crystal, who reside in Atlantic County. An aspiring athlete, Tiffany dreamed to one day play volleyball in the Olympics. She had graduated from Oakcrest High School just a month before her death. She had received 5 athletic scholarship offers to play volleyball, ultimately choosing Mercy College in New York to pursue a degree in criminal justice and a future career in law enforcement. She also expressed an interest in joining the Air Force if college didn't work out for her. She's been described as a beautiful, bright and energetic young lady who was full of life and made her family proud. On the 12th of July 2015, Tiffany and her parents celebrated her cousin's graduation party just across the street from their own home. They spent several hours relaxing by the pool with relatives, taking photos, and of course, Tiffany played volleyball. Her dad Stephen had said that she was having a great time. Tiffany left the party at 9:15 p.m. to return home intending to shower and change, as she had plans the following morning with her friends. Meanwhile, Diane answered a phone call from Tiffany's friend Jamie. Jamie had stated she was on her way to the Valiante's home with her mum and asked if they could talk. Diane agreed, so she headed home and Stephen joined her. Once Jamie pulled up, she started shouting and screaming, accusing Tiffany of having used her debit card without her knowledge. Diane called for Tiffany to come outside to resolve the dispute, but she just denied the accusation. Diane defended her daughter, saying she had no reason to use her friend's card, as she could use her parents' card if she needed. Jamie left at around 9:24 p.m, roughly 10 minutes after arriving. Diane then felt compelled to search her daughter's car following this argument, and while doing so, noticed Tiffany slipping her friend's bank card into her back pocket. Tiffany confessed to using the card when confronted by her mum, which led to a dispute between the two. Diane questioned why she would do it, claiming she was not raised that way and that she knew better. Tiffany's friend group, however, would often use each other's debit card when necessary, and she had recently hung out with Jamie one night. Jamie had been drinking that night, so Tiffany used her friend's card to pay for Jamie's meal and a few items totaling $86. Diane, feeling frustrated, went inside to get Stephen, but when they both returned, barely a minute later at 9:29 p.m, Tiffany had vanished. Their Deer camera at the end of the drive last captured the 18-year-old leaving the home at 9:28 p.m, striding across the road. She was wearing a black shirt, blue denim shorts, her new flat shoes and a white headband with her hair up in a bun, and then captured Stephen, Diane and their dog just 1 minute later. The concerned parents immediately started looking for their daughter. Stephen searched up and down their road several times with no sign of Tiffany. Despite the street being filled with cars, no one had seen her. They couldn't understand how she disappeared so quickly. Diane then called Jamie to inform her of a friend's disappearance, suspecting she may have ran away. Jamie returned to the Valiante's home with 2 other friends to help search for her. Had the argument and confrontation with a friend earlier been enough to make her run away? Initially, they thought maybe Tiffany was playing a game, hiding nearby in the woods and watching while they searched for her. But as time passed, it soon became clear that this wasn't the case at all. Family and friends spread out, searching by car and by foot, hoping someone would spot Tiffany, especially given her tall 6'2" frame. One thing that was deeply concerning to those who knew her is there was very little moonlight that night, and they described her to be scared to death of the dark. So much so that she would have to put on the TV if a room was too dark. Tiffany's uncle Robert figured that she can't have wandered too far due to this factor alone. It also led the family to assume that she must be in a vehicle, as for her to wander into the darkness on her own just didn't make any sense. As hours passed, friends and family continually called and texted Tiffany's phone, trying to ask where she is and pleading for her to come home. Stephen left this voicemail. "Tiff, please just come home. I love you to death. You mean everything in the world to me. Please just come home." Tragically, this went unanswered. Alarmingly, Stephen spotted Tiffany's phone in the bushes at the end of their driveway at 11 p.m. that night. Panic just surged through Diane, with a gut feeling that something was very wrong. Tiffany was never without her phone. She even had a waterproof case so she could take it in the shower with her. Had she just dropped it there accidentally? The fact that Tiffany was now out on a poorly lit night, combined with her fear of the dark, and now also without a phone as any form of light, further raised concerns. Stephen recalled checking that area earlier and claimed that there was no phone present at the time. Had Tiffany's phone been planted there later by someone else, or had he just simply missed it? After all, everyone had been calling and texting it for hours. How did nobody hear it if it was at the end of the driveway all along? Or had it been left on silent? Following this, the police were called at 11:30 p.m. Unbeknownst to Diane and Stephen, however, Tiffany had already tragically passed away. Michael, Stephen's brother and Tiffany's uncle, decided to check for her at his mum's house. It was only about half a mile away, so he figured that maybe she just walked there to try and clear her head. Unfortunately, this search also proved unsuccessful. While driving down South Pomora Road, he noticed several police cars parked by the railway tracks. When he approached the officers to inquire about Tiffany, he was informed that a female matching Tiffany's description had tragically been struck by a train at around 11:10 p.m. Michael was desperately hopeful that it wasn't Tiffany, but his worst nightmare was confirmed when he was asked to identify the body. He described the sight as one of the most horrific things he'd ever seen, but he felt it was better for him to do so than to put his brother through that trauma. As you can imagine, it was a very gruesome scene. Her body was completely mangled and had been torn to pieces. Tiffany had been found wearing only her underwear. Her shoes, shorts and headband were nowhere to be seen. Only her shirt was left at the scene. Incredibly strange from the get-go. Maybe stripping off and leaving her shoes could be understandable if Tiffany had been intoxicated in some way, but her toxicology report showed no substances or alcohol in her system. Michael returned to the Valiante home along with the police. Michael himself informed his brother and sister-in-law of their tragic loss, despite the presence of 2 officers. Given the trauma he'd just faced, Michael couldn't bring himself to elaborate on the details, however, and I'll just add, neither did either of the officers. Remember, Stephen and Diane had started to speculate that Tiffany must be in a vehicle, so with no further details, the two assumed that Tiffany was in a vehicle that had accidentally ended up on the tracks when the train was passing. As if the shock and trauma of tragically losing your 18-year-old daughter wasn't enough, social media posts and newspapers started reporting less than 24 hours later that Tiffany had taken her own life. At least one article reported that Tiffany was stood still on the tracks and didn't move as the train approached. This was the very first that the family had learned that Tiffany had actually been a pedestrian and not in a vehicle as they'd assumed. Diane in particular was devastated. They were perplexed at the theory of suicide. How could this conclusion be reached so quickly? Everyone who knew Tiffany knew her as happy and full of life, not depressed and certainly not suicidal. She had no history whatsoever of emotional or mental illness. Tiffany had plans to attend college that fall, a trip to Six Flags with her friends, and had a softball game scheduled for that Wednesday. She was going to great adventures with friends that very next morning and was excited to collect a kitten for her mum's birthday at the end of the month. So with so many immediate plans to look forward to, the family struggled to accept the idea of suicide. Those who knew her were adamant she wouldn't take her own life. Tiffany's cousin, Robert Jr., recalled she showed no signs of stress during the graduation party, instead sharing she'd bought new clothes for school and had things prepared for her next chapter. We'll come back to a few other background details shortly, but first I'll continue with the accounts from that night. New Jersey Transit Police spoke to 2 engineers on board the train that night, a student engineer of 18 months and a senior engineer. Their accounts led police to believe that Tiffany left the home into the dark night alone, stripped down to her underwear, and continued barefoot for miles before throwing herself in front of the unscheduled passenger train. This ruling, however, did not sit well with the Valiantes, so they sought help from attorney Paul D'Amato. Apologies if I've completely botched that name. I'll refer to him as Paul for the rest of the video. Upon hearing this case, Paul was convinced he'd later be forced to confirm to the family that Tiffany had in fact ended her own life, with documents supporting this. But as he delved deeper into the case, he was shocked by his findings. He sought further help from private investigator Jim Brennanstuhl and retired medical examiner Louise Hausman. Both were also concerned by their findings in this case, and felt the controversial theory of suicide was rushed and had many flaws. Let's begin with the engineers' accounts of events. Police were led to believe that both the student and the senior engineer were in the cab at the time of impact. On the initial report, both claimed that Tiffany jumped out in front of the train. The student was at the controls at the time, and the senior told his student to blow the horn, ring the bell, and put the emergency brake on. But 6 days later, they learned that the student was actually the only eyewitness. While under oath 6 days later, the senior engineer denied having seen Tiffany, as he had his back turned while talking to the conductor, but he claims the student did sound the horn and apply the emergency brake due to a girl jumping. But then when the student's statement was taken 10 days after the accident, his story started to reveal inconsistencies, making Louise question the validity of the only eyewitness. His story varied between seeing Tiffany jump out of the woods and onto the tracks, to then not seeing her until the train was already on top of her, to finally seeing her crouched next to the tracks half a mile away, before jumping out in front of the oncoming train. Several parameters were recorded on the train's black box, showing the train was travelling at 80 miles per hour, and within 4.1 seconds, the student sounded the horn, struck Tiffany, and applied the emergency brake. Louise, however, expressed doubts about the student witnessing Tiffany jump, attributing this uncertainty to the likelihood of shock and trauma. She claims that during his statement, he just rambled. No drug or alcohol tests were conducted on the engineers. The morning following the impact, Tiffany's Uncle Robert and cousin Robert Jr. visited the scene to claim any of Tiffany's belongings. The two understandably didn't want her parents to see the site. The scene wasn't even remotely treated as a crime scene. They found pieces of bone and tissue scattered everywhere, which they then cleared up themselves, saying it was the most devastating thing they'd ever done. Bloody rubber gloves were also found on the tracks, suggesting New Jersey Transit Police weren't well equipped to handle such a scene. They considered the scene to have also been contaminated, as it wasn't even taped off and had people wandering through it. The two searched for hours but only found a bracelet belonging to Tiffany. There was no sign of her missing shoes, shorts, or headband. On the 3rd of August 2015, 3 weeks after Tiffany's death, Diane took a walk down Tilton Road, only to discover Tiffany's shoes, just laid there under a tree. They were about 15 feet off the road, and positioned in a way that Diane considered to look as though Tiffany could have literally just been taken right out of her shoes. She also found her white headband about 6 feet away, as well as a car key tag 10 feet away, similar to when your car is being serviced in a dealership. There was also a sweatshirt that Diane didn't recognise to be Tiffany's, roughly 15 feet away. All of these items were located about 1 mile from their home and 2 miles from the impact scene, in an area that Diane claimed to have previously searched but didn't find anything. This only led to even more questions. Some people believe that the items were actually placed there after the incident. Diane immediately called Stephen, who then called the police.
I lost it. I was freaking out. I mean, I was a mess. A lady pulled over to see if I was okay, and I'm like, get off the grass, and I was trying to call my husband, my family. They finally came, they called the cops. This made it even more real that she didn't do this. And we needed somebody to look into it and try to find out what exactly happened to her. And I don't feel they did that.
Following this discovery, again, this is 3 weeks after Tiffany's death, police finally spoke to Stephen and Diane about their daughter's death. Prior to this, they hadn't even questioned any of Tiffany's family about her mental health or state of mind. That is despite them ruling her death as suicide before any thorough investigation taken place. That conversation then reportedly only lasted 1 hour. Officers bagged up the items and took them away, and you'd assume that they'd be taken straight for DNA testing, but sadly this didn't happen. 5 years later, the family won a court order to have the items tested for a fee. However, due to negligence when storing the items, the testing still couldn't be conducted. And oh my goodness, was there negligence. Firstly, Tiffany's shirt from the scene had been stored in a plastic bag and tied with a knot, which then just led to mould growth and rendered it scientifically useless, as DNA is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to obtain in these conditions. It's standard procedure for the items to be dry and stored in a paper bag or envelope, as plastic retains moisture. Other items had also been stored outside for weeks, exposing them to contamination. Tiffany's blood card containing her DNA was also mishandled. Analysts re-evaluating couldn't even be sure it was her without testing the parents' DNA. Additionally, a potential murder weapon, an axe covered in red markings, was found near the scene, but it was mislaid during storage, preventing any testing to determine its connection to any crime at all. Both a knife with a broken blade and a white towel with bloodstains were also found close by. The towel contained DNA belonging to an unknown male, but as this was also stored incorrectly, it couldn't be fully tested either. The paper bag it was enclosed in wasn't initialed, dated, or even sealed properly, allowing for contamination or for trace evidence such as hairs to fall out. Speculation regarding the location of Tiffany's shoes compared to the impact site continues. As mentioned, Tiffany's shoes were found 1 mile from her home, but Tiffany was struck by the train another 2 miles away, leading investigators to believe that Tiffany walked barefoot for those 2 miles, through woods and along sharp stony railway tracks. So Tiffany's feet must have been covered in cuts and grazes, and potentially even mud or grass to support this conclusion. But nope, Tiffany's feet were found to be in surprisingly good condition, contradicting this claim. Her family and attorney believed that she would not have walked such a distance to commit suicide, especially with no phone, no clothes, and while barefoot. What sense would any of it make? Let's now revisit the deer cam photo. Louise believes that Tiffany appears to be holding her phone in this photo, potentially suggesting that she took it further than the drive where it was later found. Paul also pointed out the headlights that you can see to the left that appear to be coming towards Tiffany. From this came a few different theories from within the family and their attorney. Paul theorised she voluntarily entered this vehicle, with Diane believing that it must be people that she knew and trusted. He then believes someone in the car grabbed her phone and potentially threw it out the window, explaining the phone later being found in the driveway. Tiffany's uncle believes that they then took Tiffany near the tracks. The family have said that the isolated and spooky location is a perfect murder spot, with the nearby highway and any trains going past drowning out any noise. Diane also had a couple of theories. She believes either those in the car tried to rape her daughter, but she managed to escape into the woods and hung onto the tree where her shoes were found in attempts to stop them from taking her, or that she was running away from her attacker onto the tracks and tragically in front of the train. Paul has also pointed out a large pool of blood on the tracks where Tiffany was hit. He says this suggests Tiffany was already harmed and bleeding and placed across the track before the train hit. The police, however, didn't even test this blood, as they claimed they had enough evidence to rule a suicide. So it's not even known if this blood belongs to Tiffany, or its origin at all. Paul enlisted the help of another private investigator, Chuck Atkinson. They established a hotline for anonymous tips from the public. In November 2016, a convenience store manager claims to have overheard 3 teenage colleagues discussing the case and linking it to homicide, so they went straight to the police. In the police interview, according to the manager, the co-workers had no involvement and retold what they'd heard. One of the teens claimed that they'd seen Tiffany at the graduation party and mentioned the argument with Jamie about the stolen debit card. Allegedly, Jamie was still angry and had apparently called someone, potentially a woman, who came to pick her up in a truck with an unidentified male before going to pick up Tiffany. According to what the manager heard, the 3 people in the truck then took Tiffany to an area near the tracks, stripped her at gunpoint, and humiliated her. Police then interviewed the co-workers, but they all denied ever discussing the case and claimed to have had airtight alibis that night. Law enforcement dismissed the manager's report as third-hand with information full of holes. Paul felt that the manager was credible, but that just wasn't enough evidence to bring the case to a grand jury. Investigators, however, argue the K9 unit search contradicts any theory of a vehicle being involved. 4 days after Tiffany's death, a handler took a bloodhound to the scene, requesting no prior knowledge of the site, so that the K9 could just lead him blindly. The bloodhound led the handler on a 3.2-mile route to the general area of the site. They actually came within a few hundred feet of where the shoes and headband were later found, but they didn't manage to detect those on this search, which makes you question, were they even there all along? Paul, however, questions the reliability of the K9 findings, noting there had been heavy rainfall after Tiffany's death, which would likely affect the dog's scent tracking abilities. Unfortunately, gunshot wounds couldn't be determined due to the condition of the body. A full autopsy also wasn't conducted by the medical examiner before her body was cremated just several days after her death. No DNA testing, no organ examinations, and no rape kit were performed, which could have potentially confirmed Diane's theory of potential SA. Diane stated they proceeded with the cremation under the assumption that investigators had followed proper protocols, tragically now leaving them with no opportunity for further testing. So, returning back to Tiffany's cell phone, not only was it strange in how it seemingly suddenly appeared in the driveway, but Tiffany's sister Crystal raised her concerns within the phone. Police believe Tiffany never had her phone when she left home that night. Yet her call history shows an answered incoming call from Jamie at 10:39 p.m. The call was answered for 24 seconds, so who answered the call if Tiffany didn't have her phone? This happened just 20 minutes before the phone was found by Stephen and half an hour before Tiffany's death. Additionally, a large amount of data usage on the phone indicated activity at 10:42 p.m. Data was also used prior at 10:23 p.m, but just not quite as much. In this case, the phone would have needed to have been placed within those remaining 18 minutes before being found by Stephen at 11 p.m. Louise Hausman also reviewed Tiffany's texts, which police reportedly hadn't done at all. She found nothing unusual though, just noting a recent breakup with a girlfriend living in Philadelphia, but it was on mutual terms and seemed amicable. She noted that Tiffany had just started dating a woman online, and that the night before her death she posted online, "I'm kinda content right now." which led people to further wonder, why would she end her own life? Some background details that others believe help support the suicide theory are events in the year leading up to the incident. Diane admits that there had been issues in the year prior, but they were considered to be nothing more than normal teen stuff, nothing beyond typical bickering and disputes that teenage girls have with their mum. Child protection officials also visited their home on 3 different occasions in 2014, one of which was after a teacher noticed a bruise on Tiffany's arm. Diane confessed to having punched her daughter during an argument, leading the support worker to suggest counselling for the two. They only attended one session, in which Diane had said that she was much more short-tempered due to menopausal changes, and Tiffany had told the counsellor that she was neither depressed nor suicidal. The counsellor determined that they had nothing more than communication issues. Another factor being just 6 months before her death, Tiffany had come out as gay. Diane had initially viewed it as her daughter going through a phase, but later accepted it. Some classmates suggested that Tiffany was maybe struggling with her sexuality more than she let on at home. She allegedly expressed having felt more distant from her parents recently and lonely. Another friend had also said that she could put on a brave face and hid her sadness well. Despite most people knowing her as popular, well-liked and happy, this particular friend claimed Tiffany felt she could never fit in, and a few others had said she'd harmed herself on 2 occasions. Tiffany's parents don't believe these claims, however. 3 years after her passing, Paul finally convinced the medical examiner to re-evaluate their suicide ruling. They reviewed this new information from friends, highlighting the possible struggles with her mental health, but felt that it only further reinforced their initial ruling, so felt the cause of death should remain a suicide, and then just sent their condolences to the family. Given Tiffany was recently dealing with a sexual identity, and then the argument with the friend that night, the possibility of suicide can't be dismissed. However, the incomplete nature of the investigation raises so many questions. Many believe the ruling of suicide was made prematurely, and before a thorough examination of evidence had even taken place, making it a really difficult reality for the family. They continue to fight for the death to be changed from suicide to undetermined. Many questions still remain unanswered 10 years on. How did Tiffany get from her home to where her life tragically ended? Did she walk or did someone pick her up? How did she lose her shoes and clothing, not to mention all the details surrounding her phone? Was her death simply an accident, a suicide, or maybe even murder? Let me know what you think happened. Paul believes there are individuals out there who know what transpired that night and begs they find the courage to come forward, offering the family closure. The Valiante family hope to identify the person or people that they believe are responsible for Tiffany's death. They have now doubled their reward money for any significant information about the case. In memory of Tiffany, Stephen and Diane built a memorial garden in their backyard with her favourite animals, giraffes and turtles. After her passing, Stephen built a volleyball court, fulfilling a promise that he'd previously made to Tiffany. He expresses how difficult it is waking up and going to sleep every single day, feeling like a piece of his life is now missing, and how he misses everything about her. Diane has assembled a cabinet full of memories in their home, filled with mementos from family and friends, including a prayer box that Diane uses every night. Jamie wrote a speech for her friend's funeral and contributed items to the cabinet. I've left the link below to the petition to have Tiffany's case reopened and reinvestigated. Hopefully they will soon get the fulfilling answers that they so desperately deserve.